Gautam. I just have one question to ask. So, what exactly is an advanced persistent threat? Is it, a new class of vulnerability, or is it just old wine in new bottle? Yep. It's a very generic question. There are just two options. Well, actually, it's not really a class of vulnerability at all because it's a threat. So basically, advanced persistent threat characterizes the attacker. And over the years, the threat landscape has kind of evolved. And if you kind of, okay, the slides are not coming properly. If you kind of look at the early days, like, when I say early days, probably just 6 or 7 years back, we just had two broad categories of threats. You had the typical script kiddie, who was not technically sophisticated, but was kind of aware of vulnerabilities and, availability of exploit codes. And a typical script kiddie used to focus more on identifying a reliable exploit code and then, scanning the internet for systems which probably had a vulnerability that could be targeted using that particular exploit code. So normally script kiddies used to kind of be interested in fun, hobby. They used to take up this activity as an experimentation. It was more a learning experience for them. Now, majority of the script kiddies used to be kind of construed as a nuisance for, many enterprises. Then you had the second category of, threat agents or attackers, and they were the sophisticated crackers. Now, we like to make a distinction between a cracker and a hacker. Normally, a cracker is somebody who, kind of is as good as a hacker, but probably with a malicious intent. So it's the intent which differentiates a hacker from a cracker. Now, this second category of threat agent, they are generally kind of commercially motivated. And, once they manage to compromise a particular system, they would probably, try to extract a trophy and monetize the trophy. And they were also kind of well coordinated and more organized. So they represented a potent threat vector for enterprises. And predominantly, organizations just needed to kind of focus on protecting themselves against this particular threat agent. There was also a third category of threat agent, which basically is what we call as the corporate espionage, kind of category. And predominantly, these actors, they were insiders. So, if one organization probably wanted access to intellectual property of another organization, or maybe they wanted to kind of get access to a purchasing contract, supplier contracts, etc. So what you do is you actually kind of, ensure that one person who's on your payrolls eventually joins the target organization, becomes an insider, and over a period of time, that person kind of maps the entire network, identifies pockets of sensitive information, and then kind of launches focused attacks targeting that. Now, if you look at the evolution, the first two categories of attackers, they are more opportunistic in nature. Meaning, they are actually kind of interested in any system which is probably vulnerable. And once it's vulnerable, they will probably fish around to see, after its successful exploitation, if there's any meaningful information that can be extracted out of the system. Whereas the third category of the attacker, which is the corporate espionage guys, they are focused. They probably know what they are actually interested in, and they would continue the attack until they actually get that particular piece of information. Now, if you look at this, this particular category of threat existed 5 to 6 years back as well, but most organizations took a viewpoint that they probably were not candidates for corporate espionage attempts. That was kind of reflected in their security posture because majority of them did not really invest too much in securing their internal network. It was assumed that any insider is part of the trusted population. They were not really considered hostile. So that's kind of the distinction. So the third category was already there, but probably not enough weightage was given to that. Now we move on to the last one, which is what Gautam covered in his presentation, which is the advanced persistent threat. Now the difference between the APT and the corporate espionage guys is that corporate espionage attackers were primarily insiders, whereas an APT attack can be engineered by an outside attacker as well. So how that is done? An outside attacker would probably kind of, use a combination of a client-side exploit in conjunction with maybe a social engineering attempt, compromise the workstation of a particular user, and then use that particular workstation to target the internal server landscape. So that's kind of the difference that has kind of, come with the APTs. And again, APTs represent a category of threat agents who probably are very resourceful. They have a lot of resources at their disposal. They have access to sophisticated attack techniques, and they are very persistent in nature. Now, what I mean by persistent in nature is that in order to compromise your network, they may go to the extent of probably compromising another organization which provides maybe remote management, remote infrastructure management services for you. So then they will use that enterprise as a conduit to eventually land into your network. So obviously you need to kind of look into your vendor contracts, etc., to see those people who probably provide, very critical infrastructure services for you, are they kind of protecting themselves against advanced persistent threats, because they can actually be used as a stepping stone to eventually land onto your network, which is precisely what happened with RSA in 2011. In fact, RSA was just a conduit. They were not really the ultimate target. The ultimate target actually was a defense contractor who who provided his employees remote access to the internal network, and the remote access channel actually required two-factor authentication, and one of the factor was RSA Secure ID. And most of you may know that RSA Secure ID actually generates a 6-digit random number every minute, and in case you have access to the seed actually which is used to kind of generate the next number, basically it's a pseudo random number generator, and if you have access to the seed, you can predict the sequence of the RSA numbers that get generated, and it was these seeds that the attacker was behind. So in order to compromise Lockheed Martin, which was the defense contractor, that was actually being targeted, RSA was actually compromised. So that's what we mean by persistent. So, if your, your perimeter defenses are very robust, your organization does not give an entry point for an attacker, the attacker may go to the extent of compromising your partner, your service provider, and eventually kind of land onto your network. That said, so this kind of captures how the threat landscape has kind of evolved over the last 6 or 7 years. Now, how's the response to this kind of changing threat landscape from the enterprises? Well, it's not really that good. So what we call here is a response gap, which is basically the difference between the level at which an organization's security posture should be and where it actually is. And what we see is that in the last 6 or 7 years, this response gap has actually kind of increased. Now, it should be kind of admitted that the response gap will always persist, because attackers are generally a couple of steps ahead of the defenders, and no organization would probably want to kind of invest a lot of money and resources protecting against unknown and unpredictable threats. Business always asks, why should we probably invest in this particular thing? Is this threat material? Do we have other organizations that have been compromised? Only then you can actually even prepare a business case. So as a result, you will normally find that response always lags, attack. So the response gap always will persist. Now, what really matters is how you can probably narrow down this gap. Over the last 6 or 7 years, this gap has been increasing. And EY's Global Information Security Survey kind of highlights 4 basic reasons why the response gap has kind of enlarged over the years. So the first is, security, digital security is probably, kind of misaligned with an organization's priority. In an ideal world, you'll want good security to drive compliance, not the other way around. On the contrary, what has happened in the last 6 or 7 years is that compliance has been the main driver of security. So naturally, what happens is organizations probably kind of, address regulatory concerns rather than the real risks that face their infrastructure. Second, most of the response mechanisms which organizations have kind of, used are technology centric. They actually kind of address IT. They don't really address the other 2 pillars which are equally important, which is the process and the people pillar. Gautam just kind of elaborated that in order for a successful APT attack to kind of manifest itself, you need a vulnerability, and in order to kind of exploit the vulnerability, you'll probably rely on attacks like spear phishing, which is actually kind of a play on lack of awareness on behalf of the user population. So, if an organization needs to kind of secure itself, it needs to also invest in people and the process aspects, but predominantly, most of the security investments have been technology centric. Third, increasingly, over the last several years, organizations have been relying on what we call as a bolt-on approach to security. I can actually give a very good example which, amplifies this fact. We had a particular client who had, a particular NetFlow manager, which is basically a network management solution, which provides a web-based interface for users to kind of keep track of traffic which traverses their network. This particular web-based interface had a vulnerability which is called cross-site scripting flaw. In order to kind of address this vulnerability, the vendor said you need to kind of upgrade to the next major release of the software. Obviously, that cost a lot of money. So the organization kind of went with a workaround. What they did was they deployed an Apache server ahead of this particular NetFlow manager. The Apache server was configured as a reverse proxy, and they kind of implemented a particular module called mod security there, and they configured mod security to operate as a web application firewall. And in the web application firewall, they enable signatures specific to cross-site scripting. So like this, they try to kind of address the cross-site scripting flaw without really, addressing the root cause of the vulnerability, which was lack of proper output encoding in the NetFlow manager software. And they also, in order to complicate matters, they also deployed a host-based firewall on the original NetFlow manager server, such that only connections from the reverse proxy were allowed to the NetFlow manager software. So in the process, you probably mitigated the actual risk, but you have complicated your security landscape. The attack surface has increased now. And in future, you need to ensure that your Apache reverse proxy is also up to date with the latest fixes. The mod security module is up to date with the latest fixes, and so on and so forth. Lastly, is the case of underutilized analytics. Now, increasingly, we are seeing that the attack vectors are kind of becoming novel. They are not really very predictable. In which case, what should be your ideal approach towards security? What you need to do is focus on what is normal traffic in your organization, identify that, and whitelist that. And focus on all anomalous traffic that probably happens, on all anomalous events that happen in a particular network. And those are the events which probably warrant additional investigation. Now, such anomalous pattern detection is usually within the ambit of analytics, what we call as security analytics. But what we find is organizations don't really kind of invest adequately in this particular discipline. So these are the kind of four major themes which kind of probably contributed to an enlargement of the response gap over the years. As a result of this enhanced response gap, cyber risks have been increasing. So we'll just quickly walk through about two major threats and two major risks and how they actually kind of contribute towards advanced persistent threats. A key point that I want to highlight here is about the fragile client software. Over the years, infrastructure security has matured. Organizations have kind of ensured that their perimeter is very robust. But then they have actually underinvested in securing their internal network itself. We find many MNCs don't even have an internal firewall in place. If you're on the corporate LAN, you can directly target SAP servers, you can target database servers, etc. That is because you still kind of insist that the entire internal population is trusted and cannot be constituted as part of hostile population, which is kind of incorrect, because while the internal population may be trusted, they may not have malicious intent, they can actually be used to launch attacks against your server landscape, because a typical end user's workstation runs a rich mix of client-side software. You'll probably have all of that. Nowadays, almost every user has at least two browsers, on his workstation. Maybe one is probably Internet Explorer, which comes along with Windows as per the corporate standards. And some of us use Chrome, some of us prefer Firefox, etc. I think just yesterday, Certain actually released an advisory wherein they said that both Chrome as well as Mozilla Firefox have very severe vulnerabilities which needs to be addressed. And Certain advised that if you're using Firefox, you should be on version 27. If you are using an extended support release, you should be on version 24.3. So what I'm trying to say here is, you have lots of software which typically run on a particular user's workstation, ranging from browsers, flash players, PDF readers, MP3 players, and whatnot. Now, majority of these softwares are not really kept up to date with the latest fixes. So the patch management is typically lax when it comes to client-side software. Organizations probably track that Windows 2008 server needs this particular service pack, needs this particular hotfix, but not many of us really focus on software like Microsoft Office, Microsoft Word, etc. Third, majority of the defenses on a typical client workstation are in the nature of antivirus or anti-malware software. And as Gautam mentioned, these softwares typically look for signatures once content is written to the disk. In-memory inspection normally is performed by a host intrusion prevention system, a HIPS or something like that. But normally HIPS is reserved for server-side software. People do not normally go for HIPS on client side. Although, it's kind of changing because now majority of the vendors have come up with endpoint security suite, which includes a host, intrusion prevention system as well. But in case that is not there, then you are kind of exposed to those kind of attacks, the in-memory attacks. And last, majority of the users typically are logged into their workstation as the most privileged user. So right now, a few months back in EY, we had installed a particular, we have kind of gone with Windows 7 rollout, and we were allowed to kind of escalate privileges on a need basis. But what I find is some people are almost like always in the privilege escalation mode. So whenever they want to kind of escalate privileges, they escalate it for 7 days. After 7 days, it mandatory logs you off, and then you again escalate privileges for 7 days. So in effect, what you do is, although your IT organization, IT team has good intentions, you try to subvert that, and you always are logged into your system as the most privileged user. The sad part here is, in case the client software gets compromised here, the attacker need not really escalate privileges. He's already kind of a privileged user. So all this put together kind of ensures that the client software eventually serves as a conduit to your internal server landscape. And this is typically what is actively exploited by most of the advanced persistent threats. Closely linked with this is the zero-day marketplace. Now, if you look at the RSA attack, which happened in 2011, it actually targeted a particular zero-day vulnerability in Flash Player. The CVE reference for that, I think, is 20110609. So this was the vulnerability that was actually targeted. And increasingly, you'll probably see that most such zero-day vulnerabilities will actually surface, predominantly targeting client-side software. This particular slide actually captures the rate card for zero-day exploits. It's kind of a dated rate card. It was kind of, I think, published in March 2012 in Forbes. If you look at this, you have Reader, you have a typical Flash or a Java browser plugin, and you have iOS at the bottom. iOS is actually not the Apple iOS, it's the Cisco iOS. And if you see, the price for Cisco iOS is high because Cisco iOS is a custom-built internet working operating system. It's not really a general purpose operating system. It's an operating system which has been specifically designed keeping security and network performance in mind. So the last line actually underscores 2 points. One, no matter how purpose-built you kind of make a particular software, it's only a matter of time before a new vulnerability will probably surface there. You can always argue saying that, many vendors actually take the stance, like Microsoft, for instance, that Apache probably is less secure because it's open source, the source is known to everyone, but maybe the Microsoft suite of technologies are not so. But that's kind of a wrong analogy to take because, you are actually relying on security through obscurity. It's only a matter of time. As your particular software kind of gains widespread adoption, you will find that attackers will find a way to breach the security of that piece of software as well. In fact, until a few years back, people used to feel mainframes were extremely secure. That's not so. Mainframes were extremely secure because they were always behind the firewall. They were never exposed. So the moment you probably kind of expose mainframes to internal attack vectors, you find that they can also be kind of subverted. So what I'm trying to say is, ultimately, no matter how purpose-built, how customized your software is, it's only a matter of time before a new working exploit will surface. And nowadays, for every exploit, there is a price, and that's the price card that you have. Earlier, you had what was called full disclosure, where attackers used to kind of voluntarily disclose all information about a particular security flaw. Then you moved away from full disclosure to responsible disclosure, wherein you kind of focused on, kind of jointly disclosing a vulnerability with a vendor. The objective being, disclosing a vulnerability should not really put enterprises at risk. So now, with responsible disclosure, when a vulnerability was kind of revealed to the public at large, you found that a patch was also simultaneously released. So that was good. Now, somewhere in 2006, 2007, Tipping Point and iDefense basically embarked on a particular initiative, which was called a zero-day initiative. They started rewarding researchers who found zero-day exploits. The rewards, the amounts involved were kind of pretty minimal. They were not really something, like this. But then that was the starting point. And Tipping Point probably had a valid reason to do this because they were actually coming up with an intrusion prevention system. So they obviously needed to know what are the different zero-day exploits that are kind of, floating on the internet, on wide. So Yeah, so this started off as a small exercise where researchers were kind of rewarded financially, but now it's become a major market. What this kind of leads to is zero-day exploits may not be known to a vendor at all, so no patches may actually get developed to address those particular vulnerabilities. And second, researchers may have no reason to kind of disclose it to anyone. Probably it will be sold to the highest bidder. And third, programmers may actually turn unethical. Now, what I mean by programmers turning unethical is the easiest way for you to kind of find a zero-day exploit is to introduce it yourself. Now, given that majority of the product development organizations do not really have secure SDLC lifecycle in place, this is bound to happen sooner or later. Now, why they don't have secure SDLC in place? Because the moment you start integrating security into your software development lifecycle, your time to market is hit. No product company wants to be hit on the time to market product. So, as a result, eventually you will find that more and more zero-day exploits will actually be used. And the best part is you won't even know how many of them are being used, because that's why they are zero-day. You'll never come to know that such a vulnerability kind of exists. Now, when you combine a zero-day exploit in a client-side software with an attacker who is very persistent, what you actually end up getting is an advanced persistent threat. Now, as I mentioned, it's a threat. It's not a vulnerability. It's a class of threat agents or attackers. Second, it's a persistent threat, meaning the attacks are not opportunistic in nature. Now, what I mean by that is, people actually, kind of cite a story wherein, as long as the zebra runs faster than the slowest zebra, then you actually kind of survive. You don't become the meal for the lion. But that's not the case here, because your attacker is not really looking for who will get compromised easily. He's specifically looking for a particular target. So as a result, the attacks kind of targeted. It's not opportunistic in nature. Second, it's kind of persistent, and I just explained what persistent meant. It means that an attacker may go to the extent of compromising a completely unrelated entity in order to get a toehold into your network. To elaborate on this, we have a particular class of attacks which are called waterhole attacks. Now, you may have heard of waterholes, in the context of forests and jungles, where predators normally are found in and around the waterholes, because that's where the prey comes. Now, kind of extending this analogy to advanced persistent threat, probably if I'm an attacker and I want to kind of target a particular, corporate's network, what I may probably do is, identify a vulnerability in, say, a very well-frequented website like moneycontrol.com. Once you have identified the vulnerability, you kind of inject a malware there, which could be a malicious JavaScript. That JavaScript probably targets a zero-day vulnerability in a browser, an Internet Explorer, Opera, name it. And this zero-day vulnerability will then be used as a conduit to land into the internal network of corporates. And based on that, you could probably do some initial reconnaissance to figure out whether you have landed onto the intended corporate's network or not, and then proceed from there onwards. So what I'm trying to say is, when I say persistent, people may go to the extent of compromising, things like BAC.com, Bombay Stock Exchange website, or moneycontrol.com in order to get into your network. Third, people think the term persistent in APT actually means the attacker, after he's kind of compromised, would want to kind of stay forever in the internal network. So basically, he wants to kind of persist for a long period of time. That's definitely the desire, but that's not typically the interpretation for the term persistent. It has more to do with what I had explained earlier. Moving on, why it's advanced? Because the attacker is not really a script kiddie. They are sophisticated. They have a toolkit of zero-day exploits. They'll probably use it in conjunction with focused social engineering attack. Gautam just talked about spear phishing. Now, with social media kind of on the upswing, all of us actually disclose quite a lot of information about ourselves in public forums. When I say information, it need not really be personal information. If I know that you are essentially a risk professional, I may probably send a particular email which probably would appeal to somebody who is in the field of information security and risk. So that's an example of a targeted attack. So, with the proliferation of social media, people having, kind of disclosing a lot of information there, it's just a matter of time before, you are actually hit by a spear phishing mail or something like that. Second, most of these attacks are engineered to bypass both the perimeter as well as the endpoint defenses. Endpoint defenses can probably be very easily bypassed because, as long as it's in memory, the way Gautam explained, it may not really be on the radar of endpoint security solutions. And traditional perimeter defenses can be bypassed because you are essentially targeting on client-side attacks. And then it's obviously well planned and executed as well. Okay, I want to kind of touch upon one key thing here. Uh, you know, Gautam just said that, despite layered security, defense in depth, etc., you eventually get attacked. That's fine, but doesn't mean that you don't really invest in architectural safeguards because, that's your first line of defense. If somebody says tomorrow that, you put this box, you're safe, they are not really promising you something which is practical. You need to kind of, acknowledge that every piece of security solution probably has a, function. And all of them put together will probably in the long run kind of narrow down your response gap. So you need to invest in architectural safeguards. You probably need to invest in detection controls because just prevention controls will not help. An advanced persistent threat will go to any extent to eventually bypass your prevention controls. So you need to kind of invest in detection controls, which is exactly what RSA emphasized. They got compromised. They came up with a case study. They documented their own attack, and they were proud to inform it to the world because the message that they were trying to give is just because we got compromised, it's not really a shame. But what really matters is we were able to find out within a week that we got compromised. Majority of the organizations don't know after 2 years, 3 years that they have been compromised. Because like, a statement which we used in our Global Information Security Survey, there are only two kind of organizations, those that have already been compromised and those who don't know that they have been compromised. So, given all of that, how will you actually counter this, evolving threat landscape? This is again from our thought leadership material. What we are actually suggesting is that, you should have a change in your mindset. You should kind of embrace the new normal. And what is the new normal? Earlier, people used to insist that, as long as you cannot conclusively prove that my network has been compromised, and there are, persistent malware which is existing in various asserts, I will consider myself to be safe. That's probably a wrong school of thought. You need to kind of acknowledge that your network has already been penetrated. There are probably pockets of your network which have been infiltrated. This should be kind of taken as a given. Now, this has far-reaching, implications. The moment you acknowledge that there have been pockets of your network which have already been compromised, you got to acknowledge that your internal population can no longer be considered to be trusted. They should also be included as part of the hostile population. Second, you should not just focus on intrusion detection and intrusion prevention. You should actually focus on extrusion detection and extrusion prevention also. What I mean by extrusion is, one, exfiltrating the data from the internal network to outside. Two, what if your own system is actually being used as an attacking agent to target somebody else's system? And in fact, we have had clients whose systems have been used to kind of target the assets of, other organizations. Those organizations have, engaged somebody to help them with the response. And as a result of this response, what has happened is our client's network our client's IP range was blacklisted in one instance. So if your systems are being used to kind of launch attacks against another organization's system, it's sooner or later your systems would actually get blacklisted and you'll have a lot of problems there. Third, it's always been said that when it comes to internal threats, detection controls are far superior to prevention controls. There's a school of thought now that probably the return on investment from detection controls now is superior to those from prevention controls. So probably, you should also focus more on the detection controls. And last, you should be equipped with incident response capabilities as well. Moving on, I was just saying that in case of most organizations, the security response is kind of misaligned with the organization's priority. You are focused more on compliance and not on risk. When it comes to risk, what EY is actually advocating is that your response should be threat-centric. Normally when your network has been compromised, the first thing that you ask is, how did I get compromised? Through what vector did the attack happen? I mean, how did the attacker enter into my network? And then I try to do a root cause analysis and I try to kind of, block that particular avenue. That's not the right approach. Instead, what you need to do is, who actually is probably the attacker? Why is the attacker kind of interested in my landscape? What information is the attacker kind of keen to acquire? And then you design your security controls to protect that particular information. You could probably kind of leverage a data leak prevention suite, which kind of focuses on, accidental as well as intentional abuse of access to the particular asset and so on and so forth. Third, you need to enhance detective controls. I will not really elaborate on it. I've already spoken enough about it. Fourth is you need to kind of redefine your penetration test. Now, almost all organizations, majority of the organizations, engage one or the other service provider to perform penetration tests for them. Normally, these pen tests are very focused activities, wherein you say that you target these 10 IP addresses of mine, you target this one particular website of mine, etc. By kind of restricting the attacks to assets, you probably are missing out on the big picture. What we advocate is that penetration tests should be scenario based. They should be kind of objective driven. So an organization should probably say that, I have a VoIP landscape. Try to demonstrate whether somebody can abuse my VoIP landscape and eavesdrop on calls. Because by eavesdropping on a call between two senior people, I may be able to gain far significant information than by actually compromising a particular server. So that's basically the scenario-based penetration testing approach that we advocate. Second, the pen tests traditionally have targeted perimeter, software, or they target server-side software. They don't really target client-side software. Increasingly, you should start engaging with your service providers to target client-side software. Third, it's not just IT assets like servers, routers, switches, etc., which are critical. Equally critical are systems or workstations, laptops of your senior people, senior employees, a CIO, CFO, etc. So you need to kind of ensure that as part of a penetration testing activity, assets used by sensitive people are also targeted. And last, you should try to focus on assessing the effectiveness of security solutions that you have deployed in your landscape. What I mean by that is you have a WebSense content, filtering software. So is it really doing its job? Is it possible for an insider to bypass content gateway and access URLs or websites which, he or she is not supposed to kind of access? Those are the things that you need to kind of try as part of your penetration test. Okay, a mandatory pitch. So how can EY help? We have a suite of solution offerings which probably would address most of these security concerns. The ones which are at the top, they are more into prevention, and the ones at the bottom are more towards detection. So we actually conduct attack and penetration exercises, both internal as well as external penetration tests targeting infrastructure and web applications. We also do wireless penetration tests. We perform security code reviews, which focuses on static code analysis, like finding out buffer overflow, SQL injections, etc. in your code base, and which also focuses on malicious code detection. We also, advise our clients as to how to integrate security into their SDLC. We can actually help you with, threat modeling, attack tree development as part of your design phase. We can help develop secure coding handbooks, and we can probably kind of ensure that security is enmeshed into your SDLC lifecycle itself. We also perform security architecture reviews, both application as well as network architecture reviews. We perform what we call as threat and vulnerability review, which is the combination of automated vulnerability assessment and configuration review focused on whether system parameters are as per minimum baseline security standards or not. That kind of covers the prevention suite. Going on to the detection suite, we are offering a managed SIEM solution, which, as Gautam said, if you have, say, a 5.1 million alerts, how will you kind of distill it and arrive at actionable intelligence? That's typically what the managed SIEM piece will actually offer you. SOC implementation, some clients want to kind of, eventually own and operate their own security operations center, but they want, kind of initial hand holding. So we'll probably help you conceptualize, design, choose the right solution, deploy them, configure them, operationalize them, and eventually train your resources and hand it over to you. We'll also kind of, help you kind of with your incident response efforts in case a breach has been detected. So as part of this particular service, we will focus more on impact assessment followed by containment. We will also help remediate the root causes that were actually exploited as part of this particular incident, and we can help you design the future state as well. APT diagnostics, this is something, to go hand in hand with what Gautam from FireEye had mentioned. Say you want to do a proof of concept. You would like to just know whether really my network requires an APT solution to be present or not. So we can actually do an APT diagnostic exercise wherein we will try to launch focused attacks targeting client-side technologies in your network, try to exfiltrate data, and we can actually see if your existing security infrastructure can prevent or at least detect these attacks. And moving on, we have managed APT detection and mitigation. So, it's not as, again, as Gautam mentioned, it's not enough. If you just detect an APT, you also got to kind of mitigate it. You got to have incident response, which will ensure that the mitigation happens pretty rapidly. So that's precisely the solution offering that addresses that need. So that concludes my session. So in case you have any queries for me. FireEye solutions are more architected around their product offering, which is the entire FireEye suite of product, what they call as malware protection system. Ours is like more, what should I say, technology agnostic. Okay, to some extent, yes. Now, if your DLP implementation is only network centric, then probably the answer is no, because sometimes it may be possible for extrusion to happen through a channel which does not really go through the corporate egress point. So, for example, I use a data card, or I go home, I use my laptop, I connect it to my wireless access point. Probably if extrusion happens there, then it may not really go through my corporate egress point. So I may have to kind of combine a perimeter DLP with probably a host-based DLP and maybe a very robust endpoint security suite.
And maybe to add to that, when they use the advanced persistent techniques, probably the way they send the data is not in clear text. So they may use a custom encryption technology, maybe obfuscation, XOR to extract the data. So if you have file and they want to push it outside, and you have DLP deployed in your network as well as on the desktop. Now if they use any of these technologies like an XOR, either a custom encryption probably, then sending that data is very easy, because then the DLP solutions are going to fail, because they will not be able to trigger the alerts, and there's no mismatch or there's a match between whatever rules has been written. So yes.
And here again, a host DLP will probably add some value because let's say I have a sensitive piece of information and I'm trying to create a derivative piece of information which uses partially information which is contained in a document which has been classified as confidential. Now, a perimeter DLP may not really help you here, because after I've created this derived piece of information, as he mentioned, I could probably compress it, and then I could probably encrypt it. Now, if you were using a host DLP, most of the host DLPs, what they will do, there will be a host-based agent which will track that you are using a confidential data to create a derivative work, and the derivative work would also be accordingly tagged, irrespective of the fact that whether it got subsequently compressed or encrypted, it will again be tagged. And this tag can probably be detected by the perimeter DLP, which will prevent the data from going out. So yes, I mean, you probably will have to invest in a combination of perimeter and host, and you have to supplement it with other host-based security controls. You can, in fact, a conventional host-based DLP or a perimeter DLP can be configured like that, but that may not really help, right? Because attackers, by their very nature, would like to keep changing their waypoints. What are waypoints are basically systems which are used in an APT where attackers collate exfiltrated data. So normally what happens is, if I'm an attacker, I'll probably target, a box of a particular corporate customer who has hosted a server in Rackspace. I will use that particular server as a waypoint, and I will exfiltrate data from your organization, put it into that particular server, and then take it away from there. And I'll keep changing the waypoints because I don't want to be kind of traced because of the waypoint. So, kind of putting a rule which actually focuses more on the destination where exfiltrated data goes probably may not add a lot of value in the long run.